So just click continue.
So thank you all so much for joining us for this vegetable gardening and raised bed gardening workshop. We are so appreciative of Taylor and the Master Gardeners who are part of teaching this class today. And I hope that you all enjoy it. I'm going to turn it back over to our Master Gardeners.
All right. Thank you, Mary Beth. And Philip Francis is going to be our first presenter, and he's just going to go through Vegetable Gardening 101. So some basics of vegetable gardening. And he has been, how long have you been with the Master Gardener Association?
This will be year 6 at the next month.
Okay, awesome. So been with us for a while. He does so many great things in the community, works with the Giving Garden, if you're familiar with that project, works very heavily out there, very knowledgeable. And so he is going to get started on his Vegetable Gardening 101 presentation, Philip. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thank everyone that is watching this presentation. We're going to talk about Vegetable Gardening 101. So I'm going to just basically hit high points. I won't go into a lot of great detail because it's basically just a how to do vegetable gardening. All right. So let's see what we got there. The next one. Okay, come on. Okay. Like anything, if you want to be successful, you got to plan. And vegetable gardening is no exception to that. And there's 2 things I want to go over on this particular slide. One is benefits, and the other one is understanding the basics. And benefits, home gardens can provide financial and nutritional benefits. Gardening activity enhances personal health and well-being, and vegetable gardening production is increasingly popular, especially in Tennessee. One of the things that years ago that I did, we lived in White Bluff, and we had enough land to do a pretty good sized gardening. And one year I was wanting to grow hominy, well, corn, and make hominy. And my wife did that. And then I discovered that I could buy the hominy in the store a whole lot cheaper than I could doing it myself. So basically what I'm saying is I learned to focus on vegetables that were expensive in the store so I could grow them in my own garden. The other thing is understanding the basics, which is extremely important. We're going to, one of the things that understanding the basics is simply the soil, the site selection, which is critical, crop maintenance, soil test, extending the season, and the how and the why. You know, you need to know how to do whatever you're doing the right way, but you also need to know why are you doing it, okay? And we'll talk about some of that. Okay, the next slide is characteristics of a good garden site. Light is critical. Plants need 6 to 8 hours of full sun. Sunlight provides energy for the plant production and growth. The sunlight provides the heat that plants need. And the gardens should be away from buildings and trees that prevent you from getting the sunlight that the plants need. The picture that I have off to the right is a good example of not having a garden where a tree or a building is blocking that sunlight, which is critical. The other one is slope versus level or versus a slope. The garden should actually be on a level bed. Rainfall or water from garden hose can run off rather than soaking into the ground. Now, what I've got shown over here is that's a pretty steep slope. And we have a master gardener, and his where his property is actually is on a hill. Is on a hill, and so he had to build his beds in such a way so that the bed was flat and everything. But otherwise, a slope like this can cause some challenges for a beginning gardener. Water can run off and also carry away your good soil, leaving trenches that you'll need to fill in. And steep slopes, water is more likely to run off. And if you use fertilizer or any insecticides or pesticides, they can also get into the groundwater, and also if you have a stream close by, which is wind up polluting that water. A steep, the steep slope. I got something in my way here. Come on. Well, shoot. Well, it's going all over the place somewhere now. Okay, let's try that and try that. Okay. Okay. All right. Good drainage and not rocky soil. An ideal garden soil allows water to drain through the soil, but also holds water for the plants. Plants need the water too. And remember, roots breathe. Wet feet is a nice way of saying, do not drown me. The best way I could illustrate that, after a heavy rain, if you go out there on your driveway and look at the pavement or the concrete driveway or whatever you have there, if you find earthworms on top of the driveway there, that's telling you that the water is filling up all of the crevices where the oxygen can get to. So the earthworms need to breathe too. So in other words, they don't want to drown. You can also use a moisture meter. On the right-hand side, there's a picture of a moisture meter that I bought. And on there, it's going to have some little numbers for the kind of crops that you're growing. On the back of that package, you will find flowers and also vegetable plants, and there will be a number for the plant to have. It's going to tell you you don't have enough moisture or you have too much moisture. It's a good way, and it's not very expensive anyway. Soil texture is greatly influences drainage, as large particles tend to allow water to drain faster than smaller silt and the clay particles. In other words, if you have something and if there's nothing but sand is there, the water will just kind of drain real fast through it. But soil with too much clay holds water because of the small particles. Usually farmers that have ponds built, they like to have clay there because they want that water to stay there and not drain out so much. Loamy soil has a mix of clay, sand, and silt, which provides a good intermediate drainage. And your garden should not be really rocky, Okay, next one. Row and planting orientation. And this is critical. You should have your garden facing north-south orientation so the sun can penetrate the garden, shining down the rows. This is especially helpful during the winter gardening period when the sun stays relatively low in the sky. Now then, here's something you also need to remember. If you have tall crops, like tomatoes or corn or whatever, tall crops should be planted on the north end of your garden. And the reason is that you want to prevent them from shading the shorter crops that require hot afternoon sun exposure. Okay. Depending on the size of your garden, okay, one of the interesting things is spacing is critical. There's a website, and it's down on the lower left right-hand corner. It says Johnny Seeds wilcodxteam.com growers library /online tools calculators. And what this does is that it will tell you if you're going to plant out a row of, let's say, okra or a row of tomatoes, however long it is. This calculator will allow you to tell you the information of how many tomatoes you need to plant in a particular row, how long the row is. The reason it's a real nice little website. Garden planning can save you time, money, and space. The plan will allocate space for crops ahead of time and estimate seed and plant quantities. The other thing is that keeping a journal is a good asset. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Using Johnny's interactive planning tools and calculators help with planning and scheduling your crop growing season, from calculating how much seed you'll need and when to start, replant, and harvest. Now then, one of the things that I think is critical is to do a journal. Now then, at the Giving Garden, this is how I do my journal. I'll put on there what the crop is and some information about that, and then over as on a spreadsheet goes, you know, how much did I purchase, how many packages, how many. So and without going through a lot of this stuff, basically I know how much I purchased on seed. I know how many onions or whatever, how many plants I needed, the date that I started them, the date I did peat pots or whatever. But you'll also look at that little memo notebook pad, the red. I use that to record what's going on in our beds. If I see insects, what kind of insects, when we planted things, how they're doing, and then I'll take that information and put it into my little journal. The element, okay, we have types of garden beds. Basically, we're going to look at a few things. One is in-ground beds, raised beds, and then containers. Okay, in-ground beds. What you're doing there, you're using existing soil. It's financially economical, so less permanent, and lower water. They have lower water requirements. Now, raised beds. Raised beds. If you look at the picture on the lower left-hand side there, that's one form of a raised bed. They give better drainage, less weeding and maintenance, longer growing season. They're easier soil amending and accessibility. The neat thing about the raised beds are kind of like, if you put them in a pot, they may require a little bit more water than you normally would use there. Containers. Containers are pretty cool from the standpoint is that depends on how much space you have, the type of plants that you have. Okay, they're good if you don't have a lot of yard space. They're good for small crop yields for like 1 or 2 people. They can be placed anywhere that's convenient for sunny areas. They're movable and they're not permanent there, and they're low cost, low long-term commitment can be there. All right. Soil. What we want to do is look at a healthy garden soil It needs to be a loamy soil. Excuse me. A mix of sand, silt, and clay. What does healthy soil look like? I saw a video years ago on YouTube of this farmer in North Dakota, and his comment was, good soil looks like black cottage cheese. Well, most of our soil down south doesn't look like black. It's going to be a brown, it'll be a red. But basically, it ought to have, if you look at cottage cheese and you look at the soil, they should have that same kind of characteristics of looking at it. The other thing that's critical is that soil testing, organic matter, nutrients, minerals, and pH, because different plants have different requirements as far as pH, as far as nutrients and things of that nature. Now then, you can go to the Williamson County Ag Extension Office, and they will give you everything you need to tell you how and how to record it. And you can take that little box back to the extension office. They will send that, they will take that to the office to get it soil tested for you, and then you will get a recommendation on what you need to do. The other one is looking at this right here. pH ranges. pH is critical to your plants. The pH ranges from 7 to 14, with 7 being neutral. pH less than 7 are acidic, while pH greater than 7 are alkaline. When the folks started moving over here to this country, and they would they didn't have pH meters and all this other stuff. What they would actually do, they would taste the soil, which is they could tell if it was acid, alkaline, or neutral. That was the only way they could tell at that particular time. Each plants, whether they're vegetables or fruit, or whether they're flowers, each thing has a particular pH factor that needs to be known. Okay. If you look here, this is your standard chart on the nutriments. If you look at the first 3 there, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And that's critical, that you need to have those 3 nutriments. And then they're going to tell you what range they are. For nitrogen, it's going to be mainly from like a 6 to an 8, or maybe 8.5. But anyway, that soil test will tell you, based on what you're planting, what those nutriments need to be. Here's the form that you'll get. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of little boxes and how I identified each one of those. This is not a hard thing to do. It's pretty simple to do. And they'll send you they'll send you a PDF file, and then they'll put in the mail a hard copy file for you. Okay. Here's the sample report. We're going to look at everything there that covers, especially your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. I won't go into much of this right here, but they'll tell you how much and what you need to do. All righty. One of the things that happens if you garden very much is that you'll start getting your seed catalogs around December, January, and then the big box stores will have all kinds of plants coming in. And the thing about it is that it's also, you can get so excited about doing something and buy some tomato plants or pepper plants or whatever. You go out there and plant them, and all of a sudden a frost hits and it wipes out everything. So here's a little, this is the USDA plant hardiness zone. Our zone is, hardiness zone is a 7A. In other words, it goes down a range of 0 to 5 degrees above zero. The last spring frost date in Nashville is April the 21st. The first fall frost date is October the 10th. There's only a 10% chance of frost before or after these dates, according to a 30-year weather data. Now then, if you have put some plants out early, you can protect them, but you're going to have to listen. You're going to have to see what the temperature is going to be, especially when it drops down at night. It's a wise thing to always check your local weather forecast, because of climate change, our temperatures are warmer. Okay. Planting in Tennessee. There's 3 planting seasons in Tennessee: cold and warm season crops. This is a little list of what kind of plants you can plant if for a cold season, and also for a warm season. It's also going to give you a list. Okay, do you want to some plants should be planted as transplants, and some should be direct seeded in the soil. Like you got the beets should be direct seeded in soil. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, carobi, lettuce can go either way. Irish potatoes are seed pieces, but it's going to let you know it's best to do this as a transplant, or if this is best to do it planting the seeds directly in the soil, which is also critical. The University of Tennessee has a neat calendar. It says Tennessee Home Fruit and Vegetable Garden, and they have this is the one showing February. And what they've done, they've taken the calendar for February, and they've listed all the things that you can do in your particular area for the month of February. Start January, February, going all the way through December. And it's all it'll list. Okay, if you're living in East Tennessee, you can do this. If you're in Middle Tennessee, you can do this. Or if you're in West Tennessee, you can do this. So it gives you a good heads up on a lot of the what can be done each month of the year. All righty. Direct seeding and using transplants. Direct seeding goes directly in the garden bed. The ability to choose a wide variety of seeds, hybrid or heirloom. That's a big debate there. Heirloom probably has more flavor than your hybrid seeds. They're also inexpensive and more benefits to that. Another thing that you can do is what I shown on the right-hand side here is I got some toilet tissue, and I just drew a line on the tissue in the middle of it, and I looked to see. And what I did, I made a flour paste, and I used a ruler, and I chose a certain type of seed, and also based on the fact that what the spacing was for that particular seed. And the neat thing about this is that you won't wind up overseeding. So if you're going to plant lettuce or or carrots or Swiss chard or some of these other plants, it's very, very easy to get too much seed, and you wind up having to thin it out. this is one way of solving that particular problem. And just lay it down, and you've got almost like two rows right there. So you got the row spacing, and also you got the spacing between the plants, and just kind of slightly cover it up according to what the seed is. And they talk about a lot of times to maybe about a inch, 1/8 of an inch of soil. Transplants. Transplants have a lot of good qualities. These are some a photograph of what I have started last year in the giving garden. They provide quick growth. One of the benefits is that they are garden ready more quickly. They take no effort to start and mature more quickly. You can also get just a few of a variety that you want to from hybrids or heirlooms. And when purchasing plants, look on the underside of the leaves, checking for insects, diseases on the plant. And a magnifying glass is a good thing to have in the garden. Checking the plants before you buy them, and also checking the plants for insects. And they like to hide behind on the bottom side of the leaves. All right. 2019 Tennessee Top Performers. Every year they do a research for home gardeners across the state, and they even allowed home gardeners to get the seed and plant them. And then what you do is then you'll just give a report back to UT. All right. And they will do the All-American seed selections, and they also list the ones that came in the best responses. UT Knoxville is one of many testing sites there. Okay. All right. If you look at a seed package, there's a lot of information there. This package here is going to, the name of it is called mesclun. Mesclun is basically a French word meaning a mixture. Now, if it was a regular lettuce seed, it's going to have the common name and the scientific name, which is critical. So let's go through what we have right here. A seed packet is more than just a pretty envelope. It's a miniature biography that reveals all a gardener needs to know to successfully cultivate the seed it contains. Okay, plant name includes the common name, cultivar, and Latin name, such as zinnia, and then it gives you the common name, and then in parentheses it gives you the scientific name. Now, if you look at it, it's going to show the planting depth. The planting depth is determined by the amount of food inside the seed. Its depth is not provided. It's a basic. Sometimes it's provided, sometimes it's not. But anyway, if it's not, look, you plant it 2 to 3 times the width of the seed. The spacing is based on the size of the plant and maturity. Now then, you begin to also, up here, I have on there, it's package 4, 2013, okay, which is critical. So in other words, that seed is going to be the seed that will highest percentage of germination for the year and the date. The lot number may not seem critical to a lot of folks, but it identifies a specific batch, which is useful if there's some problems with that particular batch of seeds. Now then, in this particular lettuce, it's a mesclun mist. It's a mixture of taste, color, and texture. All righty. Some of these are mild. Some of them are hot. If they're going to be hot, they're going to have some herbs in there. So always read the back of that if you get this here. Okay. Mesclun seeds prefer full sun and have extended production during hot summer months, and they need in partial shade. So you're going to, it's going to tell you if it's an annual or if it's going to be a perennial or biennial. The depth, what to thin it to, does it need sun or partial shade or full sun? It's going to tell you the days for germination and the days for maturity. And it's going to let you know about who the supplier is. Okay. Easy to grow plants in Tennessee. Okay, beans. I don't know if let me say this. If this is the first time you are doing a garden, all righty, the first time, you haven't done it very far, it's better off starting with the small space, because a lot of times I've seen a lot of gardens where people had too big of a garden for them. They hadn't done it before, and by the summer is summer, that beautiful garden they thought they had is going to turn into a bunch of weeds. I do have one book that I would like to show you. If you've never done a gardening before, the square foot gardening is a good book to go by. Okay, they have a lot of good information in there. But the easy plants to grow in Tennessee are beans. The main difference between green beans is their growing style is classified as bush or pole beans. Bush beans grow compactly. They're usually about 2 feet tall and do not require extra support. Now, pole beans climb up a pole. Okay, if they can get anywhere from 10 to 15 feet, you can get the ones that are stringless or they have strings. It's your choice. The other one is peppers. Many varieties from hot to sweet. They're an excellent source of vitamin A and C and potassium. Bell peppers also contain a healthy dose of fiber, iron, and others, along with being full of nutrients. Bell peppers deliver a satisfying and low-calorie crunch with every bite. Cherry tomatoes are the ones that just are just great. Okay, you got red cherry tomatoes are high in acid versus the yellow ones. They are determinate varieties, including bush varieties. They also the indeterminate varieties grow and produce tomatoes for a long period of time. Your determinate ones, they will grow to a certain height, produce all of the fruit at one time, and then that's over with. The indeterminate just keeps growing and will produce fruit as long as it can last. Radishes. Radishes are easy to grow. They're a good source of vitamin C, vitamin B2, and they contain calcium and potassium, which helps blood pressure. Greens. Mustard greens, 7-top turnip, purple top, and collards are great to grow in the spring and also in the fall. We planted some Florida broadleaf mustard greens every year in the fall, and they will set your mouth on fire. Go back up here. Lettuce that is darker green is a better source of nutrients than lighter colors. And the most nutritious lettuce is romaine. Some folks cannot eat regular lettuce, but they can eat romaine. If you go to a restaurant and they have a food bar, and you go where the salads are, and you'll see one bowl, a large bowl that has a mixture of lettuce in there. Then you'll see another bowl that just has only romaine lettuce. I didn't know why they did that. I had a friend of mine tell me, I said, I got some lettuce if you want it. He said, well, I can't eat regular lettuce because my my body can't digest it real well. He said, but I can eat romaine lettuce. And I thought, that's why they do the romaine lettuce separately. The other thing that I would say this on, like on cabbage and also romaine lettuce, what we do at the Giving Garden is we, on the romaine lettuce, the outer leaves, we break off the outer leaves and let the plant continue to grow. We do the same thing on the cabbage plants. We just break those off, send them out. Herbs. Parsley has a mild bitter herb that can be enhanced the flavor of your foods. The other thing about parsley is there are several varieties of parsley: mint, dill, basil, sage, and rosemary. Okay. Now then, references for Vegetable Gardening 101. These are some University of Tennessee articles, along with the number on there, but I've got that all on the for the web link, and they have a lot of good stuff there. And is that it? That's it. That's it.
Wonderful, Philip. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Philip? If so, you can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself. Well, Philip, I guess you just explained it so well. No one's got any questions.
I guess, is there any way we could send out the reference or the whole
Yes.
PDF file, folks?
Yes, we'll send out the PDF. If you'll send me the PDF slides, we'll get them out to everybody, and that way they'll have the reference list as well. Oh, we do have a question. Someone asked, what is the best season to grow parsley?
Parsley, we do it in the spring. And the interesting thing about parsley, I have seen that we'll plant it in the spring, and then and just leave it in the ground. And I have seen some of it go almost all the way through winter.
Yes, actually, when we have some in a container on our patio, and even when we had the 5 inches of snow, it was still green, and it has grown throughout all 12 months of the year. So parsley is a good one that's a kind of an all season grower.
Yep, it does good. There's one thing I would say when you clean up your garden, what we've started doing at the Giving Garden, like any of those plants, let's say tomatoes or peppers or cabbage or stuff like that. What we started doing is using our loppers and cutting off the plant at the soil level and leaving the roots in the soil so that they can decay instead of yanking them off completely, roots and all of it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It helps with soil structure and getting that pore space and porosity in the soil by leaving those roots, and it adds to the organic matter of the soil.
Yes.
Someone asked about getting the calendar. I put the link in the chat box. We don't have any printed out. They're really big, a lot of pages. So you may just want to go, you can get it online. You can use that link. And Mary Beth is also going to be emailing the reference sheet, which will have the link on there as well. So if you want to go back and look it up online, it might be easier that way. We don't actually have any printed out on hand. Someone asked, you said sand is good for the garden. And wait, let me see. Let me pull up the chat. Do you recommend purchasing play sand at Lowe's, or where do you buy the right kind of sand?
Well, let me see. You got play sand, which is finer, And then you have your regular sand, which is a little bit more coarse that they use in construction, like concrete and cement, things of that nature. The cheap now you can buy it in bags. Okay, if you want a lot of sand, there's a place called Site One that it's in a. I mean, I don't know how much is in there, but I do know this. That you have to have a truck for them to load it in because it's so big. Okay, but if you have a lot of clay, sand is a good thing to do that. The other thing is that at the Giving Garden we have a lot of clay out there. We don't put that much sand in there. Usually, what we're going to do is we'll put wood chips that the folks who cut trees and chip them up, and we'll have the wood chips out there. We'll let them kind of sit there till they start to break down, and then we'll put it out in the Giving Garden. But if you have a lot of clay, then I would just simply say I would work in the garden, and I would just put 2 or 3 inches of compost and work that into the soil, just in the bed, just in the bed itself, not in the aisleway or pathway. But the other thing that I do in my own garden is in the fall when the leaves begin to fall, and then what I'll do is I'll go through and mow them, chop them up, and put them in a bag, and then I'll put those in my garden and work it into the soil. Leaves are a great way of adding a lot of nutriments and texture to a garden, and they're cheap.
Yeah.
In fact, if you go to the city of Franklin, and you see these large bags that you can get at the big box stores, and they're filled with leaves. They take those leaves out to their compost center and let them decay for about 2 years, and that's where our compost comes. The cheapest place to get compost is at the Franklin Compost Center. You have to go to, now they don't have any compost right now, but for $20 you can get a yard of compost out there. Now, if you go on Black Cow compost, it's going to be about $5.50 a bag, about 50-pound bags. And so if you look at $20 for 4 or 5 bags, that's going to be about 200 pounds. But you're going to get far more compost at the compost center at a cheaper rate, and it's good compost.
Yes, it is. That's a good resource. And I'll piggyback on that to say that for sure, if you're going to put sand anywhere in your landscape, whether it's in your lawn or your garden, make sure you're using the construction grade sand and not the fine clay sand, because you want that nice coarse sand. You don't want the really fine stuff. It'll mess up your soil. So like Philip said, use that construction grade sand if you're going to put any in. And then someone asked about adding grass clippings. Is that okay to add to your garden?
Grass clippings contain your nitrogen and phosphorus and potash. You can put the green freshly cut in a garden, but only a light layer, as I understand. If you have a lot of it, you can put it out and kind of let it dry out, and then you can put that in your garden as a mulch. But don't put the green, freshly cut grass real thick in a garden as a mulch.
Yeah,
that's what I've heard.
Yeah, when you've got fresh material, it takes away from your other plants to break itself down. And so it's oftentimes better to let things sit for a while and break down and then add them to the soil.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have, Philip. Thank you so much. It was great information, and I know all these people are appreciating all your expertise for when they get their garden started soon.
Cool.
Awesome. All right, and so Philip, if you'll stop sharing, I think at the top of your screen it should say stop share. There we go. Yep, you did it. You got it. You're a pro. You're gonna do all our Zoom talks. You're gonna do all our Zoom talks from now on. All right. So thank you, Philip, again. And now we're gonna have Gina share her screen. And we've got Gina Bradford and Brian Hitchcock, and they are new master gardeners, but not new to gardening. They both have a lot of expertise, especially in raised beds. So if you have ever thought about doing a raised bed, or you currently have raised beds, they're going to go through building, using, maintaining, and all the great things that go along with raised bed gardens. And so I'll go ahead and let them get started.
Great, thank you, Taylor. So yeah, like Taylor said, Brian and I, we were in the 2020 class of Master Gardeners, and we actually were teammates on our group demonstration project garden. And our garden was actually at the Ag Center. And we ended up, I believe the 4-H group had planted some tomatoes and peppers and things alongside where we planted our vegetables. And then because of COVID, they ended up just kind of saying, well, we're not going to be able to continue, with this garden. So Brian and me and our team, we kind of inherited the 4-H garden last year, and we took care of it and got to see it through the summer. So that was an honor to do that. And during our time working together is where Brian and I learned that we really do enjoy raised bed gardening. And I'll tell you about some of the reasons why that seems to work for us. So, let's see. I'm sharing, but let's see. Sorry, oh, there. Sorry about that. Okay. So as we mentioned, we're part of the Williamson County Master Gardeners Association. And here's a little bit about what we'll talk about today. I'm going to talk to you about why you might be interested in building a raised garden bed. And Brian will talk to you about some of the considerations, such as location and design. And he's also going to talk to you then about the construction of raised garden beds, and he'll highlight some of the different materials that you may want to use. And then Brian and I are both going to share our personal stories so you can learn from our experience with raised beds, and then we will answer questions as well. Okay, so why would someone want to build a raised garden bed? For me, I find that there's a little more efficiency. I'm going to call it less equals more. And I grew up helping my mom in a garden, and it was kind of your traditional big garden in the ground with the rows, and I thought it was a lot of work, and I thought, boy, I don't know if this gardening stuff is for me. This is but as an adult, I did discover the book that Philip actually mentioned as well, which is the Square Foot Gardening book by Mel Bartholomew. And I think what was really helpful for me about reading this book is it takes a lot of the guesswork out of gardening, and kind of helps you get early results, which then makes you want to continue to garden and do it again and again. So square foot gardening is really just one technique that you can use within a raised bed garden, but really all raised beds offer some of the following benefits, like they can be a little more efficient with space. Some of us, we don't have backyards that are just giant where you have space for rows and rows of crops, but you may have space for a 4 foot by 4 foot square foot garden or raised bed garden. Typically, it will require less weeding using a raised bed. And even if there are some weeds, if you're using the soilless mix that I'll talk about, it's a lot easier to pull a weed out of a soilless mix than like clay, kind of the hard clay that in the ground. And then the soil quality. So Philip talked a lot about some of the things that you can do to your soil in the ground to help amend it, like adding compost, and we talked about sand and, you know, leaves and different things. A lot of times a raised bed, you may end up filling it with what they call a soilless mix, which again, for me and as a new gardener, when I first started, I wanted to take out some of the guesswork. And so I did use a soilless mix. And what I used is a third compost, a third peat moss, and a third vermiculite. And we will talk about that a little bit later. And there's a slide that shows you that soilless mix. But again, that was really helpful because I just thought, well, the book says to do this, so this is what I'll do. And it got me some results. So that was helpful. And then watering and efficiency. So we talked about that a little bit too with Philip. The soilless mix, it helps the water drain right around the root system of the plant, and it helps it stay there. And that can help conserve the water. So in the ground, the water can sit on top and take a little bit longer to drain, but the drainage is a little more efficient in a raised bed, and it drains faster in a raised bed. But because it drains well and goes right to the root, it can be more efficient. So that's a consideration as well. And then with fertilization, the book actually says, hey, with this soilless mix of a third compost, a third peat moss, and a third vermiculite, you may not need to fertilize ever. And so that you get enough nutrients from the compost. And some people will still want to fertilize, but if you do fertilize in a raised bed garden, you have the ability to target it and make it just a little more efficient that way as well. And then also seeds. We talked about the seeds and the seed packet, and I thought that was a really helpful demonstration because I was a little confused about seeds when I first started gardening. And one of the things that it instructs you to do, as we mentioned, is like kind of plant all of them and then thin them out. And in a raised bed garden, you do have the ability to just kind of plant the seeds that are needed. You can also use Philip's method, which I thought was cool, how he showed the proper way to space seeds so that you really are just planting what you need. And then I save seeds from year to year, and that's something that's a little more efficient as well. You can use them again and again, but I do try not to use expired seeds. So I'll try to keep them current, and I go through and, you know, figure out which ones are still going to be good for me. So for me, after all those benefits, I decided I think I want to try raised bed gardening. And so the other thing that gives me the opportunity to do is enjoy it with my kids. And the picture on the right is our strawberries, and that's one of their favorite things to do every year is pick strawberries out of our very own garden. So Brian is going to talk to us about some of the considerations for raised garden beds.
Well, great, Gina. Thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation that Philip did. And I want to reiterate what he said is designing your garden is really location, location, location. There's a lot of considerations relative to selecting a site on your property for your raised beds. One, of course, is overhead considerations. You don't want it too close to buildings. As a result, you'll get some shading that will not be conducive to your planting, and you're growing particularly for vegetable gardens. The other piece of it too is that you want to make sure you've got orientation to sun. A minimum of 6 hours a day during the summer months is ideal for where your raised bed garden is located on your property. You also want to take a look at the access to irrigation as well. I have a rain barrel system that I use. I've got 4 55-gallon rain barrels, and 3 of those barrels are located in close proximity to my garden. In fact, I have redesigned mine so that I even actually have it closer now to my raised beds. But if you are using city water or even well water, and you're using it through a pump, you want to make sure you're not having to haul a hose all the way across your individual garden area. You also want to make sure you've got good air circulation. This is really critical, particularly for new seedlings and them being able to grow and thrive. You don't want to put it up close to a solid wood fence, and you want to make sure that if you do put it up next to the fence, that you've got a slatted fence. That's acceptable, but having a solid wood fence adjacent to your raised bed garden is not real conducive to the air circulation. And as Philip mentioned, slope considerations. As some of you may know from your history lessons, there were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which actually were terraced gardens on slopes. And it was a very effective way of growing vegetables and flowers in that particular environment. Now, again, we're here in Tennessee. We have a variety of both flat land as well as sloped land. And raised bed gardening is really conducive to both types of environmental leveling. You want to make sure that you design your beds so they complement, not compete with your existing landscape. And you'll see what we've put together in our own individual gardens, how they really kind of work together and mesh together as part of an overall landscape plan. You want to make sure you have good access to the beds and your crops, so you've got plenty of circumference all the way around, and you don't want to make a really one long bed, but have small beds that are broken up so that you have easy access 360. And probably first and foremost, I probably should have put this at the very beginning, is that you want to make sure that your HOA rules and regulations are followed. The best way to do this is probably put your design together and then present it to your HOA to make sure that there's not going to be any issues with their covenants regarding gardening and particularly vegetable gardening on your property. Always think vertical. And one of the things that I always tell people is you're in a square foot environment, you want to have your crops growing upwards so you maximize the space that you have available in a raised bed. Traditional gardening allows you to go horizontal. In raised bed, you want to think vertical. So let's talk a little bit about how to build the raised bed gardens. Here's a couple of material ideas to consider when you're planning your raised bed garden. Of course, there are many prefab kits. Raised bed gardening has gained popularity, particularly through the pandemic. And you'll find that a lot of your big box hardware stores, as well as a lot of online retailers, are selling those prefab kits. They usually come in very standard sizes. They're typically always finished. They have a medium life to them, which is always good to consider on that, because you may, as you grow as a raised bed gardener, you want to be sure that you're growing your gardens appropriately. So having a long-term garden may not be the most conducive on the first go round. They are a medium to high cost on that. Now, you can use wood also, and that's what I've used in the past. That's what Gina has used in her garden. It has easy to medium assembly. You can do a lot of customization with wood. Please use insect and rot resistant species. So cedar, either western or eastern cedar, redwood, and one wood that I discovered, but would be really great if you could find somebody who mills Osage, is to put Osage planks or walls in your garden. I found that when I was doing my research, and it's one of the most rot resistant and insect resistant on the market, probably more so than cedar or redwood. Think about treated or untreated wood, and there are applications where using treated wood is a good idea. The wood beds have a medium to long life to them, and they can be the most cost effective if you are skillful in being able to cut wood and be able to put those planks, into a usable garden consideration. One thing that I'm going to talk about is the consideration of using either stone or galvanized metal corners in your construction to prolong the life of your beds. Now, masonry, stone, and metal are all really great materials. They're long-lasting. They are the strongest materials available. They are a little more difficult to assemble. It does require, particularly if you're using stone, to be able to put together, particularly if you're using a tiered raised bed, to put them into place and be able to mortar those into place. You can use cinder block, masonry stone, poured concrete, and corrugated metal. But it is also the most costly way to construct your particular beds. All right, so wood treatments versus untreated. So one thing to consider not to use are treated railroad ties. I've known a few, and utility poles as well. Both of those are treated with a creosote material that are carcinogenic. Now, a lot of these products are not using the same type of preservatives in the past, but as you can imagine, you want the longest lasting product on your railroads and also on your utility poles, so you're not having to replace them every 5 or 6 years. The thing to consider is that a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to use some recycled wood. Well, the thing that you want to be sure you're doing is really not using anything prior to 2004 that was treated with chromiated copper arsenic, or CCA. It does occur naturally. Small doses from treated wood can be absorbed and bound within soils. But the deadly part is the arsenic, and even at low levels, and it is more readily absorbed by your plants. So the further away you get from the sides of your beds, the less likelihood you have of leaching into the soil and also being produced in uptake into your plants as well. CCA was phased out of residential use in 2004. And then there are some other products called pentachlorophenol treated recycled products. Those are ones that you want to stay away from. But those are, again, a group that has been really phased out from use in any type of commercial and residential wood treatment programs. Now, you can use treated products. The product that you want to take a look at, and it will be marked on the ends of any timbers that you buy that are treated, is that alkaline copper quaternary ammonium, ACQ, or copper azole, Ca. Excuse me. Those both are acceptable to use. There is a new product, and I will say, make this disclaimer that we are not endorsing any of these products that we talk about on here. However, we just want to give you an idea that there are a lot of products on the marketplace. One product that I looked at when I was in the process of redoing my beds is a product that is made by a company called WoodGuard. It uses a polymer wrap and it is the internal wood is pine, but it's treated with bromate, which gives it termite resistance. The polymer wrap gives it the durability of being able to use. Now, I will tell you there is a downside to this type of a product because that polymer wrap is not bonded to the wood. So when you cut it, you have to use a very, very fine-toothed circular saw blade to be able to keep from that polymer ripping apart from your particular board that you're cutting. Excuse me. But if you're using a cedar or redwood, you could use eco-friendly stains or sealers that are water-based that will be able to keep that keep that longevity of that type of wood in place. Always make sure that you do look for ground contact use on tags or on the MSDA sheets for the particular wood products. Now, masonry, stone, or brick, cinders, concrete, and cement block are all really great materials to use. But you have to consider that in cinder block, fly ash is used, and I think fly ash has some detrimental leaching effects into your garden soil. The way to go get around that is to consider sealing any type of cinder block with a polymer paint. That will give you that ability, that blocking mechanism from that type of fly ash leaching into this soil. The cinder blocks and cement blocks are maybe not as attractive addition to the landscape, and you may have some reservations about using that based on what your HOA has to say. They may want you to structure it more in either wood or in a brick type fashion. It does increase the alkalinity of the soil, but that does decrease over time. So it's not like something that's continually produced all the time. Now, brick's acceptable. Pavers are a really good addition in there. And some of the ideas when you are using masonry, stone, or brick is to make sure, just like in regular construction, that you have weep holes in there so that you have proper drainage. You can imagine that cinder block, and in particularly brick, does not allow water to permeate through. But if you put in weep holes or a base of pea gravel or a base of crushed rock on the bottom of a cinder block or masonry type application, you'll have really good drainage that you won't have to worry about those type of situations. Remember, these are permanent and they will not deteriorate. But as I mentioned before, if you're a beginner, sometimes doing a bed that doesn't have a long lifespan or is not a permanent fixture may be a good way to ease into raised bed gardening. And then once you like your designs, you know what you really like, is to maybe gravitate into a stone or brick type application. Here's a picture of a cinder block, concrete block bed. I thought this is a really nice example of how they use not just the interior space, but the exterior space. So you get some really good square foot gardening applications on this. And it really, the way they put this together really is very attractive. Here's another real basic one. This is very similar to what we have out at the Giving Garden, and Philip, I think, mentioned that before. You don't have to be fancy. This may be something you don't want to have in your yard, but if you have a large garden area or a large rural area that you want to do some raised bed gardening, this is a really good application, and it's cheap and very inexpensive to put this kind of a garden together. Now here's a, Gene, you want to go back one? And there we go. Let's go back. We're going forward, I think. There we go. Just keep going previous. There we go. And one more. Oh, I guess we don't have the, I thought we had that slide in there. I apologize. I had a slide in there that showed another picture. One of the items that I talked about was the use of a stone, kind of a combined stone as well as wood base. There's a product that's sold over at Home Depot that I'm going to be using in my new garden, and it's made by a company called Oldcastle. What it is corner, basically supports. You can drive a piece of rebar right down through the center of it. They're all pre-drilled, and you just slide your boards into cutout grooves. A 2x6 board, you can slide a 2x6 right into the grooves on the Oldcastle product. It's real handy because, as I'll talk to you a little bit about my experience, this is a way to really get a lot of longevity out of your garden. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide there. Here are some more considerations too. When you are using wood, using a visqueen or food grade plastic on the interior will not only reduce leaching, but it will reduce the decay of your timber that you're using, particularly on cedar and redwood. Consider also the fact that not only do you have above ground pests, but you also have underground pests. We have a huge problem in Tennessee with voles and moles. And the thing that you can do to prevent destruction by voles and moles, because they can enter in under the ground right next to your raised bed and tunnel up, and particularly for moles, eat the roots of your vegetables and plants that you have in there, is to use a narrow gauge galvanized mesh on your base, just basic 1/4-inch chicken wire, and put that in the very bottom of your base. Another thing too is that you can also put in a crushed stone base. That's a little more expensive than the galvanized, but either one of those help prevent those underground critters from burrowing into your raised bed. I talked earlier about thinking vertical, and let's talk about some of the trellis materials for vertical gardening. You can use wood or wire. I've used cattle fencing, which works very well strung between a wood frame. That is really perfect for growing vining vegetables such as cucumbers and your pole beans, as Philip had mentioned. I've also used painted PVC with wire mesh. Now you want to make sure that your PVC is a large enough diameter, between 3/4 and 1 inch. Not try with a 1/2 inch with the wire mesh across there. And I used my wire mesh and attached it with Ziplocs to be able to stretch that out and across my frame. If you use too small of a gauge, your plant weight, and if you have a very productive garden, that plant weight will bend and break that PVC frame. You can also use metal, but it is very expensive and it's not as flexible in crop rotation. You can integrate cold frames to extend your growing season. And I'll show you one of the things that I did with building a cold frame over my raised bed garden. Again, using gravel mulch or stone around your beds for better accessibility, and to reduce the amount of mud or the proliferation of weeds that might grow up in between there. Gina talked a little bit before about soil mix considerations, and I want to show you a slide here that basically talks about the soil mix recipe. Vermiculite, 1/3 of vermiculite, 1/3 of peat moss, and 1/3 of compost. Now, one of the things that you can do, and this is what's suggested in the Square Foot Gardener, is to get yourself a large tarp and do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 mixtures onto that tarp, and then just roll that tarp back and forth as your mixing tool. And then you'll be able to take that and with the help of another person, usually pick that up enough and either slide it in or just shovel it off into your raised bed. That's a really good way to make sure that you get a good consistency across all of your soil mixture on that. You can also buy ready-made bed mixes at the co-op or over at someplace like Lowe's or Home Depot. Now, what do you want to plant? Well, you can plant anything you can plant elsewhere, you can plant in a raised bed. There is no restrictions on a raised bed. But there are two considerations. You have to think about the height of your plant and the bed height. And I'll show you when we are looking at our pictures of our individual gardens of how I use rotation in mind and also the size of my bed to be able to plant certain items in there. Remember that also too, if you're doing root crops, if you're doing something like potatoes or any underground crop like carrots, you have to have a minimum of at least 12 to 18 inches in your bed height. So you'd have to have a stacked raised bed garden. And then using your vertical planting techniques and trellis gardening in your crop placements so that you're always making sure that your trellises are easily removed and moved to another bed when you're doing a rotation on your crops. Here's a guide, kind of a planning guide. This is kind of a reiteration of what Philip had talked to us about. On the square foot raised bed gardening, though, you'll see that you can have specific inch requirements of putting vegetables into your gardens. And the way we look at it too is that there's a really good guide in the back of the Square Foot Gardener that shows you what you can do on a square foot basis. I actually use bamboo poles that can double as stakes for my snap peas and things of that nature. I use that to just segregate my square feet in my beds. So when I'm planting, I'm sure of getting that square foot. Now, for instance, in this particular one, in my square foot, in a square foot, I'll plant upwards of usually 12, anywhere from 8 to 12 spinach plants in a square foot. And I found that to be just as productive as if I was just planting in rows to 2 to 4 inches apart. But when you look at it, 2 to 4 inches apart gives you right at 12 plants. If you're doing a square foot, you're planting right up on the edge. And then here's some organization of your crops, some of the consideration that you need to have in particularly doing your raised required support. And then those that are not necessarily needing support, I would always use support. If it says could benefit from support, I'd always use support on those. Eggplants, I always have found that I just put a bamboo pole right down next to my eggplant, don't even tie it or anything, and it seems to work extremely well.
All right, thanks, Brian. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
Nope, I think that we can share our own individual experiences now.
Okay, cool. That's what I was going to say. So yeah, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my kind of history with raised bed gardens and kind of leading up to where I am today. And then Brian's going to share his as well. So this is my first raised bed garden. And well, you probably can't tell by looking necessarily, but this is 4 feet by 4 feet. Just we purchased the lumber, at the hardware, at the Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, and put that together. So it was fairly inexpensive to build. And again, for my first garden, I would say that this was the perfect size. And Philip mentioned that. I think Brian did too. So I'm going to reiterate that again. We didn't go huge, and I ended up having plenty of food for my family and enough to give away. And I learned how to do canning, and I canned salsa and made pickles for my cucumbers. So it was a really fun summer, and I learned a lot this summer. And you can see we just used like twine, and that's how we have in 4 feet by 4 feet, we now have 16 square feet in there for planting. And then we also built a trellis, as you can see on the photo on the right, to help the vining crops. And then there's my son, 9 months old, who was out there kind of watching us and, supervising the project. I don't have this as a slide, and I don't know how well it's going to show up as I put it on my camera, but this is just a quickly kind of scribbled guide of an example of a 4 foot by 4 foot raised garden bed. So here's my 16 square feet. And it says on here that this is my 2019 garden. So I've tracked what I've planted within this and where. So, and again, I know you probably can't read all that, but I have, like cucumbers times 2. So for example, you can put 2 cucumber plants into 1 square foot. And then it's always a good idea, as Philip talked about earlier too, about taking notes and tracking. And then when I do my 2020 garden, for example, I can pull this out and say, oh yeah, here's my map of where I planted things last year. And it's always a good idea to rotate your crops as well, and then maybe plant something different in that spot the following year. So that's just another kind of tip. And then this is my first year is there on the left, and I'm holding my son, and he's 9 months old there. And then on the right is my second square foot garden. The following year, now my son is what, 20, he's like a year and a half old, and I was expecting my daughter, who was born April 27th. So I was in a real tight window of being, I didn't want to get a freeze, but I wanted to have everything planted before my daughter was born. So again, for what was happening in my life at the time, that 4-foot by 4-foot bed was really a good size for our family. And you can also see that taller box. We added a taller box because we wanted to grow carrots. So Brian mentioned that too, that you're going to need it to be a little bit deeper. This is only, I think 6 inches tall. It was 2 by 6. So that we made it taller by adding that extra board on top there. And carrots is another really fun thing to grow with children. There's nothing like pulling a fresh carrot right out of the garden. And then we ended up moving to Thompson Station. That first photos, those were in Franklin, and we ended up, we really wanted a larger lot for gardening and for outdoor entertaining. And so this was probably this is one of my first gardens at our home. And you can see one of the things that they do talk about is some people, when they think about putting a garden in their home, they put it like way in the farthest corner of their yard, as far away from the house as possible. But being fairly close to the house, now again, you want to keep in mind your shade considerations like we talked about, but the convenience of that, I have a back door right there. I can walk out my back door. You see the hose there. I've got a water source close by, and the garden, there's some landscaping around it, and it kind of became part of the landscape of the home, and something that's right there and enjoyable for us and for everyone else. And then this is what we have now. So this is something we did in 2020, which, like all of you, we were home a lot in the year 2020. And I said, I think I'm ready. My kids are a little bit older now. And I really want to expand my raised beds. And so we now have 5 raised beds, and they're 4 feet by 8 feet. And again, you wouldn't want it much larger than that size, because you need to be able to walk around it and reach in and access your vegetables. These are not meant to be walked through. And then these are all 4 of the 5 are a north-south orientation, like we talked about earlier as well. And then we added the pea gravel to help with like drainage, and then also my husband would have to like weed eat around the gardens. You can't run a lawnmower back in this area. So it was nice to just use the pea gravel as well for that. And of course, for me, it was really an aesthetic thing. I really like the way it looks. I think it gives the garden its own, individual, unique, separate area. And so part of the thought process, I'll repeat some of this, was just that I wanted my raised beds to go from just being raised beds to be really visually appealing and to match kind of our current landscape. We used untreated pine for these new 4 by 8 beds, and they're 2 inches by 10 inches, and we stacked them double tall, so they're 20 inches tall is the height, and then as I said, 4 by 8 diameter. The inside of the raised bed, we used a product called Safe Coat Dino Seal, and again, not promoting, it's just one that I found online, and we ended up talking to this company quite a bit about what their product is, and it will protect the lumber, from water and soil and all that good stuff, but it's also considered to be food grade, food safe, organic, so it's a very safe material. I didn't want anything that touched my soil to be unsafe. So that was something that we used to protect the lumber, but also would be safe. And then the outside of that wood, we ended up staining with the same color that is on our pergola, which is close by. So again, it has a nice appealing look. And then I talked to you about the pea gravel that we used as well. Sometimes the plants, they provide shade on the ground around them, and the ground doesn't really dry out then because it's not getting that sunlight, and the pea gravel helps with that as well. And one thing that I would just mention again is when I was originally thinking about these new raised beds, I kind of wanted them a little bit taller than 20 inches. I was thinking maybe 36 inches. And but then I got to thinking about the fact that I grow pole beans and indeterminate tomatoes, and those things grow tall, tall, tall. I would have needed a ladder to harvest those crops if I would have gone any taller than 20 inches. Even at 20 inches, I'm going to be reaching up, you know, on my tiptoes probably to get my tomatoes and my pole beans. So that is something to consider as you're deciding how high you want your raised beds to be. And then this is just a photo, as you can see, from the from our pergola. Like, this is from our porch, kind of looking out to the raised beds in the garden area. And to me, it just kind of looks like it complements, right? They belong there. They're part of the landscape. They're kind of part of the conversation, right? If you're hanging out on your patio and, you know, you can be enjoying the garden as well. And then our spring project, which is coming up real quickly, right, is we are going to build trellises for our vining crops. So that'll be our last thing. The other thing, I guess, that I'd mention really quickly is that on the soilless mix, if I did a soilless mix in all 5 of these raised beds, it would be really expensive. I think what my strategy personally will be is to maybe do one with the 3rd compost, 3rd peat moss, 3rd vermiculite per year. And then like I said, there are other materials that will be perfectly fine to amend the soil, you know what I mean, in those raised beds. But that is just a consideration. That's something to consider, that that would get very expensive very quickly with that amount of beds. So I think that's my strategy, 1 per year until we get all 5 there. And I also get my compost from Franklin Compost, which is another cost savings, and it's really high quality compost. So I think that's all I had on my raised bed. So Brian, I'll let you tell us about yours.
Great, Gina. Thank you so much. Well, unlike Gina, my kids were all grown and out of the house. My oldest son had been out to college before we even considered thinking about our first construction of raised beds. Jason was home. He's an architect by trade, but he got very engaged with a friend of ours who was a big one on the square foot gardener program. And so he read the book and said, Dad, if you buy the materials, I'll help you put that together. So here's our first construction of raised garden beds. You'll notice that these are 2 of mine are 16 foot long, and then the last one is right at 8 foot by 4 foot. The last one we planted strawberries in, and we have since rotated out of strawberries and put in seasonal crops into that last small one in the end. But the 2 in the front, as you notice, we used visqueen, basically a 10 mil visqueen, and lined the inside of that. We put a 1/4 inch gauge, basically galvanized fence wire, chicken wire, if you would, on the bottom of those. We've never had a problem with moles or voles getting into this garden, and it's worked very well. Now let me point out one thing on this one. You'll notice that we have wood corner supports. Those all have 1/2 inch bolts driven through, and they're screwed together, so that it's really, really good construction, very tight, very well designed. Right now, I'm in the process of redoing those first 2 beds. They both have deteriorated to the point where the sides are about ready to fall off, not because those have deteriorated as much as those corner supports. For some reason, they've deteriorated much more rapidly. We did use all natural material. We did not use any treated materials, nor did we treat the inside of these. So that's part of the reason why we think that the beds are just having to, you know, go through a natural evolution. I'm going to be redoing my beds with using that Old Castle cornerstone. And I wish I'm sorry I don't have a picture of that for you, but they're available, I know, at Home Depot and at Lowe's. And we're going to I purchased Eastern cedar boards from a gentleman that had a bunch of trees that he'd cut down, and he cut them for me. I'll just have to notch them and put them into the supports, the stone supports, and then I'll drive a piece of 1/2-inch rebar right down the center of those supports to give them a firm base on there. I am going to still line the inside of mine with visqueen, but I too have found a eco-friendly sealer that I'm going to be doing on both sides of my new beds going forward. Here's let's go back for one there, Gina. There we go. So here's my first year of production in place. And you'll notice the supports that we've used. Not anything real fancy. I'm using in that second bed a frame trellis that went down into the ground. And that has supported winter squash very nicely for us over that growing season. We also had some pole beans and some peas that we used, just bamboo stakes. And then we used just that cattle fencing, as you'll see there in that first bed, and put 2 posts down into it, in between it, to support it. And we use that for cucumbers over the top. Here's my second iteration. These were built in 2015, a little closer to my house. But as we mentioned before, integrating the design into your landscape using trellises that were very complementary to our 2 beds that we had in there. And we were able to move our cucumbers over there, our vining plants onto that side there. And then we would plant tomatoes in those first 2 beds. We're rotating this year over, this is our 6th year of using these particular units. You'll notice that we didn't use the wood corner supports. I actually used galvanized at 90-degree angles on the inside of my beds. And they seem to be holding up much better than the ones where I used the wood supports on the inside. You see that I think we're expecting a frost, so I had a lot of my plants covered up in that particular area. But it really works well. Now, I mentioned to you before, I'm redoing my rain barrel source. Between those 2 trellises, I have just enough space to put 2 rain barrels. I'm actually going to put in soaker hoses that I'll be able to just turn on, leave them on when I want to be able to water all 3 of those beds without interfering with cutting grass and having to do a lot of manipulation when I'm doing my yard work. Here's a close-up of that one trellis, and you'll see how my winter squash, my Hubbard squash, is growing very nicely up that side. And then here's a support. This is towards probably mid-season, where my Hubbard squash did a very, they were very resilient. And I've used the same genus of squash seed the past 3 years because they adapt very well to this particular type of gardening. But any type of your vining plants, you'd be surprised as to how much support that they have in the vines themselves, and how you can grow, as I mentioned, vertically rather than horizontally, and take up much less space and get a much more productive garden out of that. Here are some hoops that I did. I did this more to put bird netting over to reduce the amount of feathered friends coming in to pluck my seeds in that. But I ultimately did these so that I could give it a little bit of shade too during the hottest part of the day on there, and that worked very well. And you'll see to my left, my assistant gardener over there. She's watering with our watering can. Let me go back to that last slide there. And here's an iteration that we did in 2016. We actually made a cold frame. My son came out and helped us put this together, but the material that we used was Lexan that I found on Craigslist from a guy down in Pulaski who had bought a bankrupt aircraft manufacturer's inventory, and he had 2 or 3 pallets of these 3x6 sheets. And so we incorporated that in there. And let me tell you, that stuff has been very, very durable. It has faded. It's got a little bit of fade to it, but that just it has not detracted at all. And this frame is one that we can remove those doors during the summertime, and we're able to turn this into an open garden just with the framing around it and grow our vegetables. But I would start spinach and lettuce in this usually in February and get at least 2 crops using the cold frame in this particular bed. And then we would convert it over to summer squash as the summer months started to heat up. So here's a list of resources that we have of various materials that we use for our presentation. Again, I think any gardener will tell you that one of the books in a must-have library is always the Mel Bartholomew Square Foot Gardening book, either the first or second edition. I, in fact, actually had a first edition, took it over to McKay's book and record swap, and upgraded to my second edition out of that one. And it is a wealth of knowledge, will give you just a plethora of really good information. Another good resource has always been from the Tennessee UT Extension office on the building of raised beds and on vegetable gardening. Used a lot of that, and then treated woods, number of different resources we had on that. So thank you all for attending today. We really appreciate your time, and I know it's a lot. We had 2 hours of pretty intense education on this, but I guess I'll open it up to questions. And Taylor, if you want to field some of these questions, be glad to answer those.
Yes, thank you, Brian. And thank you, Gina, so much. Great presentation. And the resources, again, Mary Beth commented she's going to be collecting those resources to send to y'all. And I put in the chat box a link to that building, raised beds that UT has, but we'll get that information out to you. And we really appreciate Brian, Gina, and Philip for giving us all this great information so we can get started. I know this warm weather has gotten all of us excited to get our gardens going. So if you have questions, put them in the chat box and we will get them to Gina and Brian. Any questions? You can also unmute yourself and ask if you'd like. Well, I guess you just covered the topic so thoroughly that everybody is just, their mind is blown. No questions.
Hello.
Oh, we got a question. Yes.
Okay, so I have like a flower bed or whatever, but this time I chose flowers and veggies. I wanted to know if I could like, I guess, plant them together, or do they need to be separated? This will be my first time with exploring with vegetables.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'll tell you, and I'm going to I'll already give you my experience, and then I'm going to let Philip talk about this because he is the master at using certain types of flowering plants to detract and avoid pests, so you have some natural pest deterrents. I have planted marigolds in all four corners of my garden. And that's in each one of those 8-foot sections. And I have reduced my pest population considerably by using a marigold complemented with my vegetable garden. And Philip, I'll kind of let you talk a little bit if you got anything.
Okay, that's a great thing. One of the things that we've done at the Giving Garden is we'll put calendras, which is a pot marigold, and some other types of flowers out there. Now this is just my opinion, but instead of just putting, depending on our beds in field 1 are out of concrete blocks, and they're 4 foot wide, about 37.5 feet long. And what I would rather do, instead of just putting them at the ends that we had before, I would rather plant the flowers at the complete length of that bed. And I say that from the standpoint is that a lot of the insects are attracted or repelled by the fragrance that the insects are attracted to. So what I found is if I have a row of tomatoes, or if I have, let's say tomatoes, then I will plant some, probably about 4 or 5 feet where I've got the tomatoes, and then I would have like the, let's say marigolds or calendras or some other ones about 4 foot apart. So that whole row is going to be one row of tomatoes, and I'm going to have a row of flowers going through there. It also brings in a lot of pollinators for what we're doing, and yeah, I also put probably on the other side of the tomato plants, I would put a row of basil. Basil enhances the flavor of the tomato. So I've actually done several things there. I've got a row of tomatoes. Now let me say this about tomatoes. Yeah, there are 2 different kinds. I talked about them. One is determinate, and they will grow for a certain length of time. And then you have indeterminate that will grow until frost. If you don't have any frost, they'll still keep growing. In fact, about 3 years ago, we grew a tomato, and the vines got about 16 to 18 feet long. They were long. But anyway, so what I would do, if you put tomatoes, and I would put basil there, and it would be good to have, whatever flowers you want around there too.
Great. Thank y'all both for that. And I don't know, Gina, if you have anything you want to add about that?
Same. I've planted marigolds. I always plant basil next to my tomatoes. I plant buckwheat seed that also attracts beneficial insects that can kind of get rid of some of the insects that we don't want. So buckwheat is another thing that you can just plant, and it's a kind of a white pretty flower, but it can attract some good insects as well.
We always want the good guys.
Yeah.
We always want to attract our beneficials. All right. Any other questions? Okay, if we don't have any more questions, Mary Beth, would you like to add anything?
I really appreciate all of you attending today, as well as Philip and Brian and Gina for teaching and sharing your expertise with us today. I have recorded this, and so I will send out the link to everyone who's purchased plants so that you can have this recording to refer back to, as well as the links for the resources that have been shared today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, well, we really appreciate all of y'all attending. Oh, sorry, we do have one last minute question that came in. Let's get that one. Let's see, what was the plant Philip said besides marigold? I think Philip, was it calendula? Is that what you were talking about? He might be muted.
Okay. Calendula is what's also referred to as a pot marigold.
Okay, so that was probably what he mentioned that y'all had heard.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so we,
now there are other ones. People need to understand. I went to a Xerxes Society. They had a seminar at the Jackson office a number of years ago, and they said that all of the bad insects compared to the good insects. Insects is what I think was less than 2% of all the insects were bad. So, which tells you that you bring in flowers and things of that nature for your pollinators. So you want more. I don't want to get rid of all the bad insects because they are food source for all of the good insects.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we are protecting our beneficials. And like Philip said, majority of the insects out in your garden are going to be the good guys. And if you come in and maybe you spray a broad spectrum that kills everything, you might be doing more harm than good and depleting your beneficial population. And the beneficials take a lot longer to rebuild their populations than our bad bugs. So always be scouting before you do anything. Make sure you're looking and you know what you've got. You may just have some beneficials and you don't want to harm those. We definitely want to keep those guys. Okay, thank y'all again for joining us. We will, like Mary Beth said, get this information out to you. And we really appreciate Gina and Brian and Philip for giving us all of your expertise and taking time out of your schedule to help us get our gardens growing. So we will get you that information, and I hope all of y'all have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy this beautiful weather.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank y'all. Happy spring.